Hello. Here it is. Time again for the list. You remember the list? All right, where are we now? 80 to 75, 76. 76. 80. Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. I quite like it. Of the Evelyn Waugh books, I think Brideshead Revisited is my favorite. It is about some young, slim, somewhat homosexual British young men, quite good already, at university, one of those fancy British places, Cambridge, I suppose. One of the boys goes back to visit the other boy's incredibly opulent estate. Later in the book, they are there during the Second World War when this massive estate has been turned into like a military base. We get to see when it was functioning in this pre-war days, and we get to see it during the depths of war. I really enjoyed it. I do remember it. It's just that some of the other Evelyn Waugh books have really, they're just a little bit too witty for my taste. They're just a little bit too, like, you can really feel him trying to get the humor in there, pushing for the witticisms. And sometimes it works. I mean, sometimes I do think he is quite showing that humor. Other times I feel that it is forced. Apparently, though, Evelyn Waugh was a very, a man with a lot of inner psychological trouble. He was a staunch Catholic, I do believe, and that caused him, his faith caused him quite a bit of grief here on the mortal plane. I'm sure he received his reward in the afterlife, but here on earth, it seemed that he was quite a miserable human being. There are some stories from his children which are pretty terrible. I guess this was in the time where the wealthy class, they would send their children away to boarding school. They would come home for the summer holidays. And I guess Evelyn Waugh was miserable having his family around him. For some reason, it sticks in my mind that he had 7 children. I'm gonna have to check that. But so all of his children would come home and they would visit him for the summer. And he was miserable having all these children around to entertain. His children have told the story. You're going to have to check this. Don't take my word for it, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Told the story about how it was quite hard to love their father because the day before and the day of the children returning to their boarding schools and exiting their parents' life for the next several months, Evelyn Waugh used to carry on like it was the happiest day of his life. His son described it as my father singing and dancing around the house with a bottle of champagne in his hand, not even pretending that he was even mildly unhappy that his children were leaving. He was out and out celebrating returning to a child-free environment. And I thought, well, that is a bit sharpish. A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. It's pretty good. It is about these conservative, upper-class British tourists who decide that they're going to go to Italy to get a bit of a taste of that life on the continent, as they say. They're going to go and visit the lusty Italians. And that's what it is. It's the staid, stoic, reserved to the point of frigidity British going to meet the Italians. Of course, I think someone embarks upon a love affair because of, the magic of Italy. It's okay. I have to read it again. I shouldn't say anything because I read it ages ago in another lifetime and I don't remember it well enough, but I remember I found it a bit slow going. It was almost as if E.M. Forster was sort of promoting the British reservedness as the proper way to comport oneself, and the Italians are, as far as I recall, it's that, the British way is the better way. So I thought it was a bit dull. 78, Kim by Rudyard Kipling, one of the oldest books on the list. I believe it was published in 1901. That one is not boring. It's an adventure story. It's about a young boy. I believe it was based on Rudyard Kipling's life, where his family were stationed, or however it came to be that this British family were living in India at the time, the British occupation of India. And so Rudyard Kipling grew up in India, surrounded by Indians and Indian caretakers. As a young child, you get so much from your environment and the people you associate with. And when your parents, in that classic British way, it seemed that parents kept children at arm's length. That's what I get from my experience with reading. I mean, perhaps that's wrong, but it did feel that British parents, they sent their children away to boarding school. They hoped that they were brought up correctly. They expected them to grow up to be young ladies and gentlemen. So this little boy Now I'm talking about Rudyard Kipling, grew up. I believe in the introduction he talks about how his father used to scold him for speaking in this like sing-songy Indian style of speaking English. And his father would tell him, speak proper British English. And I thought that was quite good. Kim is the story of a little boy in one of the big Indian cities. I don't know which one. I want to say Delhi, but I'm not even sure if he has any parents. He might be an orphan. And he tries to survive by doing whatever he can to kind of get a few pennies here and there. And one day this holy man comes from Tibet or somewhere. He's a real Buddhist holy man. And this little boy, Kim, decides that he's going to attach himself to this holy man and to help him in his quest to achieve enlightenment. They travel all around India with this holy man who's quite ignorant to the worldly ways of things, and this little boy who's quite a schemer and a scammer who's manipulating things in this funny, childish way, but deceitfully, to prolong the adventure. And it is extremely exciting, and if you have a little taste for India, for me, India is the most mysterious place on earth. Like it is just baffling. So I really recommend Kim. It's an adventure story. This young boy who sees the avenue for adventure and takes it immediately and makes the most of it. It's wonderful. 77, Finnegans Wake. Well, the thing about Finnegans Wake is that I have never even met anyone who's even told me that they've attempted to read it. And I was wondering why. I was thinking, why is it that no one that I know has even tried to read this book? I guess it's because it came after Ulysses, and Ulysses was so awful. And I don't mean it's an awful book. I mean it's an awful reading experience. It's like you're just being crushed by James Joyce on every single page. It's a horrible thing to read. I have read it, and the only way I managed to read it was because I was desperately, desperately poor in Budapest, and that was the final book that I had not read on the shelf. And even in that regard, I still had to force myself to read 10 pages a day. Just grant 10 pages a day, maybe even 15 pages a day if you're feeling quite energetic, and you'll have the whole miserable thing read in 2 months. But Finnegans Wake, I don't know. So I can't say anything about it, but I will tell you my favorite quote from James Joyce. James Joyce had this to say about his wife, Nora. I think I would know Nora's fart anywhere. I think I could pick hers out of a room full of farting women. That's romance, isn't it? Finnegans Wake, good luck to you. Now, I'm not, as you could probably tell, really enthusiastic about almost any of the books on the list this week, except for the last one, number 76, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. That one right there. Very short, 137 pages. I love this book. I love it. I love it. I enjoyed that book so much that I went out and I read quite a lot of other books by Muriel Spark. Unfortunately, none of them are as good as that one. It's a shame, but, well, sometimes you only have one masterpiece in you. But Muriel Spark wrote that one, and it is wonderful. You have to have your wits about you when you read The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, because she is bouncing all over the place. A half of a sentence, she will give you a huge clue as to what is really going on. And she has this way of very casually throwing in information about the future, which if you are not reading quite carefully, you might miss it. I had to go back to the beginning and start again because I felt that there were all kinds of little puzzle pieces that she was littering about. One of the things I do love most about literature is the subtlety. I like it when an author restrains themselves and they trust the reader enough that they can be subtle with their writing, and they can give you a clue, and they don't need to make it obvious. They don't need to beat you over the head with it. They don't need to say, oh, and by the way, you should pay attention to this next little thing that I'm about to write. No, she slips it in there, and if you get it, maybe you get it. Of all the books I really love, I think that the books where you finish the book and you think about what the author had in mind and the restraint they show, especially in the first half of the novel, when you know that they could give it to you quicker, faster, more blatantly, but they don't. They hold it back and they give it to you a bit at a time. And for me, that is beautiful writing, and I love it. Like, that's one of the things I always consider as the difference between literature and everything else. So that's it. That's the list for this week. Oh, sorry, I'm not too, no, I don't feel like I did such a good job this week. Like, if I had to read them again, if I wanted to recommend what order you ought to read them, I'd say The Prime and Miss Jean Brodie, definitely. If you like subtlety and if you like reading between the lines, I love it. Maybe it's not for everyone. You know, a lot of people need to know what's going on at all times. Number 2, I'd like to read Brideshead Revisited again. I think I need to read that one again because, you know, I've read quite a lot more British literature since, and I think I know more about European history, especially the Second World War. So I think that would be good to read again. 3, I guess, is Kim. You know, this nice Indian adventure story from a young man, like a boy's point of view. That's really exciting. Room with a View, yeah. I just remember it was a bit slow moving, and I was more interested in the Italian characters and not so much these British characters who were just constantly scandalized by their emotional behavior. And lastly, Finnegans Wake, which I haven't read, and I don't know if I ever will. I guess I have to try, don't I? I had the fortitude to do Ulysses. I guess I really should. To say that you've read a book means that you've looked at the words on every page. Maybe it didn't make any sense to you, but you can say, yes, I looked at all of the words on every page of that book, so I suppose I can say I've read it, can't I? I don't know. All right, what do we have next time? Oh, another Evelyn Waugh right away. Oh, good stuff next time. Good stuff next time. Okay, so that's the addition of the list for this week. Sorry I can't be a bit more motivational in my recommendations, but some of them I read at such a long time ago. One I haven't read at all. One I do love, and I would recommend that most strongly. Just blathering away now. All right, thanks for watching.